Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to my new YouTube channel called Creative Conversations. And during this series, we're going to be talking to people from all over the world, from all walks of life, about the big, bold subject of creativity. And my first guest is Sarah Kostin. She's from Colorado, and she is the author of this wonderful book called You Are the Blue Sky. And one of the things I really appreciated about this chat with Sarah was how she referenced a few times the fact that creativity can actually be very messy, and oftentimes, maybe most of the time, is very, very nonlinear. So I hope you find something in this conversation to enjoy, or something that will inspire you to be a creator in your own right. Please feel free to click and subscribe. And without further ado, here's Sarah. Well, hi, Sarah.
Hi, Tom.
So nice to be with you here today. And this, I wanted to tell people that this series that I've created actually came out of a conversation that you and I had last summer. So I feel really honored that you would be my first guest. And since you actually helped me conceive the idea.
Well, I'm honored that you asked me to be your first guest. I'm excited.
Yeah. And the kind of general focus around this series is creativity. And, you know, creativity is a giant, big, wonderful subject. So it can encompass almost anything. But that's kind of the general terrain we're playing in. And so do you want to just share a little bit about like who you are, what you're up to, anything?
Sure. I tend to be up to a lot of things at once. I call myself a hummingbird, and maybe you relate to this, but a hummingbird is like, I don't know, I just kind of follow what interests me and what I'm passionate about. And it doesn't always look like one thing. So at the moment, I have just launched a business called Songbird Creative that I'm actually very excited about, because it kind of encompasses a lot of the things that I've been doing kind of for work, and which involves copywriting, website design, and coaching, and also ukulele lessons.
Great. They're the perfect 4 or 5 things that any business needs.
Yes, and so I was so excited. It was that the name Songbird Creative came up, because when I hit up on Songbird, it resonated so deeply with me. I was like, because everything I've ever created has had something to do with a bird. And then I'm a musician, a singer, guitar player, ukulele player. And so Songbird, I was like, that's it. So that's what I'm currently working on, and really excited about at the moment.
Oh, that's great. And I love what you just described. There's something in that when you have that moment where this idea comes out of the blue, or wherever it comes from, and it just resonates with you.
Yes. And it was interesting too, because there was a long time where I just felt kind of unclear, and I knew I just had to get through this, that I just had to get through this muddle. And at some point I would have an idea, and it took a lot longer than I was hoping it took. But when it came, it was so obvious. So it was just kind of validation that is kind of how it works.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems like that's how so many things work, especially in the creative realm. And I'm curious about, it sounds like you sort of accepted that muddleness as part of the process. Is that true? Somewhat?
Yeah. I mean, the muddle didn't always feel great, but
Right.
I knew somewhere that it was temporary, and that there's something in the muddle that is serving, right? And I just do the best that I can. And I really did. I just felt like I did the best that I can in the muddle, and just kept kind of putting one foot forward. And sometimes it looked like being on the floor crying, but
Yes.
that was good too.
You know, that I was doing a little workshop over the weekend with some people on creativity, and we were doing visual work like pencils, pens, paper, things like that. And what was really interesting was I gave people a very simple assignment, which was almost like no assignment, like no rules. Just get your paper out, get your tools out, and start doing something. No rules, no expectations, just go. And then I would kind of talk as people were doing it. And I had never done it before. And so as we did this for a few minutes, I opened it up for people to share what was going on. And the first person who spoke said, I don't like this. And something came out of me. I said, oh, that's great. She was like, no, it's not great. So I said, well, let me tell you why I think it's great. Because you had the freedom to do whatever you wanted. And you started doing it. And there was a point where you said, I don't like this. And she said she was comparing what she was creating with some idea, which we know is not good in creativity, but we all do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I asked her, well, you had these thoughts and feelings about what you were doing. Did you keep going? And she said, yes. I said, that's why it's great. That's why it's great, because we can experience anything in the creative process. But as long as we keep going, if we want to keep going, like sometimes we do want to stop.
Mm-hmm.
And it just seemed like it opened up not only for her, but for the whole group, something that I wasn't even expecting, but I noticed people's faces. So when you describe your journey, like you can be crying on the floor, you can be feeling muddled, but something in you still wanted to keep going. So
Yeah,
keep on that.
I like that. And also it reminds me, since you mentioned my book earlier, that a lot of times there were a few times in the process of writing my book that I actually just did straight up stop. I put it down and didn't touch it for sometimes. I think my longest pause was maybe 4 months where I didn't even touch or look at my book. And in hindsight, like during that time, I was really frustrated about it, right? Like I was like, I saw that I didn't want to do my book and I was kind of listening, but I was still like, oh God, am I quitting? Like I didn't know. But then in hindsight, now that it's been published and it's finished and out there in the world, I see that pause actually was part of the whole process too.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yeah. See that to me is when something really works, like every part of the journey it's part of the journey. And it's almost like there's a wisdom and purpose to all of it, even the I was going to say momentum, but the lack of momentum or whatever, to stop, to pause. It's totally
right. Yeah, and we just have judgments about how it's supposed to feel or how it's supposed to look, when we're in the middle of it, right? But there's something in us that has to trust that it all serves, it all will work out, even if the working out is like quitting that particular project, like.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, we just start to judge that we're not supposed to stop writing a book in the middle of when we're writing a book, or we're not supposed to feel awkward when we're doing a artistic project, like you said, without any rules. Like from that awkwardness can come like a new idea or a new creative experience.
Yeah. The permission to quit is one of the great secrets of creativity.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So since we mentioned your book, first I want to just bring it up here. And I loved reading this book. I think I was telling you when we were setting this up, I came across it when I met you last, I think it was August. And then I got it very quickly. And then I found myself wanting to read it so slowly. Like I literally took 4 months to read your book, and I was just savoring it all along the way. And, to me, a lot of times in terms of reading, like I tend to often read things very fast and I race through because I want to get to the point or I want to get to whatever. And then I miss so much of it. But in this case, it was something about your book that really slowed me down. So just take your time, savor it. And so I really appreciate that. Do you want to say anything about your book, like what it's about?
Well, first of all, thank you. That was a really lovely compliment about slowing down. I often read fast too. So that's lovely. Thank you. What would you like to hear about my book? Like process or what it's about? Or I think you just said what it's about.
Yeah. I think how like what is it saying to you right now? Because since we're talking about the present, and you said you hadn't thought about it for a while, like how does it, and anything that comes up for you, how does it feel? What is it saying to you?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to take a look at it and we'll see what it's saying to me.
Yeah, there you go. Go right to the source.
Yeah. It's interesting. It feels a lot softer to me now.
Okay.
There, I think I had put a lot of, attached a lot of meaning to the book when I was writing it. And I think that's probably easy to do as a writer. Like, even though, you know, I know the power of thought and all of that. And, I was transitioning jobs when I wrote this book. So I was leaving a job that I had for 17 years and going off in my own space. So starting my own business, not sure what it was about yet. So this book really kind of was the bridge for that. And it was my way of just kind of expressing how I don't know if you're talking about if you're saying the word three principles on this show, but you and I, for those who don't know what three principles are, you and I are both, we know this understanding of the mind, right? Called the three principles. And when I learned it, which was now about 4 years ago, I really saw so much. I just saw so much of my life so differently. And that's where this book came from. It started off just, I was so like surprised and amazed by all the things in my life that I saw differently, that I started writing it down. And I've always loved writing, and writing is a way for me to make sense of things. And so really, I didn't think it was going to be a book at first. It was just kind of a series of blog posts, which is kind of why they're short chapters. They're like, every chapter is like 2 pages, which happens to be like the exact, it's like 800 to 1,000 words, which is like a perfect blog post length. And that's why, because they all started out as blog posts. And I was just trying to get this like out of me. And then at one point I realized that there was a book there that I wanted to write a book my whole life. And finally I felt like I had something to say. And so the point of why I wrote the book, which is the point of the title, You Are the Blue Sky, is that what I really saw about myself and about every human is that we're all perfectly okay. And that I just felt like that was the most important message to share with people, that even though we feel things deeply, feeling intense feelings doesn't mean that we're not okay. It's just those feelings are sitting on top of our total okayness, our total like center, that we're always fine, no matter how we're feeling about our life. And that's what I wanted to share with people, because it was like, I tried to tell this verbally to people and I would always mess up and they thought I was crazy.
Right.
And so I stopped talking to people about it because it wasn't going well. So I was like, well, maybe if I wrote about it, it will make more sense.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I love about your book, is because you make it so personal. You tell stories from what, you know, might be the most ordinary experiences of your day, you know, driving through the snow, you know, being on an airplane where there's turbulence, and it's so relatable. And so what you talk about, like what you had found for yourself in terms of feeling okay and knowing that that's part of who you are, it gets so beautifully illustrated. And so it's really fun. And we did talk about before we started recording, there was a little passage that I asked if perhaps you would read, and it might give people a little taste of the book and what you're sharing.
Sure. And I'm happy to talk about the real life story behind this too afterwards.
Yeah, please do.
Okay. So I will never forget one seemingly ordinary moment when I was sitting outside of a yoga studio, barefoot and drenched with sweat after practicing in a class in over 100-degree heat, packed mat to mat with other drenched, nearly naked bodies. Next to the stoop where I sat was a flower pot filled with colorful begonias and petunias. A bumblebee had landed on one of the purple petals. I watched the bee's tiny legs gracefully maneuver on the flower. I noticed its 5 eyes with awe and curiosity. Its paper-thin wings looked too fragile to lift its large fuzzy body. I don't know if I sat there for a minute or an hour. The whole entire universe seemed to fit inside that moment. The bee, the flower, and the air hummed and shimmered with a pulsating aliveness. I was the bee, and the bee was me. There was no separation. Perhaps you have had a similar experience, a moment when time stood still and you were filled with presence. This might have seemed like an anomaly, a one-time occurrence. The truth is, this feeling is our true nature. It is our blue sky.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. I love that passage. It's so intricately. We can edit that out maybe, but who cares? We can just be goofy. It's so beautifully described, especially with the bee with its paper thin wings, that you can't even believe it's holding the bee up.
Yeah, it's like that quote. I don't know, I'm going to butcher it and I don't know who it is, but the miracle in the mundane, or there is a miracle in all that's mundane, something like that. Yeah. And I think when we slow down and we look, we really start to see that that's so true.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing that's hopeful for me about like the ordinariness of what you're talking about is, this is just something for me recently, because there was a time in my life where, I got the opportunity to travel to different places and have all these amazing experiences. And recently, not so much, partly because of the pandemic and other reasons. But every day I go out for a walk, and I live in this little neighborhood in sort of the outskirts of Portland. So it's not really city and it's not quite suburban, but it's very plain, very ordinary. And there's a down the street, there's you might call it like a rest home or an assisted living, a complex. And behind it, there is this forest path that is only about 5 minutes long. That's all it takes to go through it. And then if you walk back, you get another 5 minutes. But there are moments when I'm in that forest, that little path, and it's even like it's paved. It's not even like totally natural. But there are moments when I'm there where I have the feeling, well, this feeling that I'm having in just these woods is just as good as any, Niagara Falls or the Grand Canyon or, wherever else I've been, because it's that feeling of even respect and appreciation for the ordinary. And all of a sudden I got so excited about that, like I don't need to go anywhere. I probably still will, but I don't need to.
Yes. I remember having that feeling when I was kind of just coming across this understanding of such relief. Like I felt like I had been chasing these big moments or exciting adventures, which I still love, like I live in the mountains, so I love nature, but I felt like I was always, I was missing the ordinary moments right in front of me in order to chase after the big moments, like races. I was doing ultra running races and, things that you could check off and say to people like, yes, oh, I've done that. Yes. Instead of just like really sinking and living in these smaller moments that happen all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And so your book is so full of those small moments, along with the insights and your reflections. And I just love how you blend that together. Now, with the story about the bee, you said, is there more to that story that you wanted to talk about?
Well, it was interesting because that happened a few years before I discovered or came across this understanding. And I had always linked that before I knew about the understanding and that moment. It was such a moment, like that moment is so embedded in my brain. It's just one of the, I don't know if you have a moment like that, but it is like, I can go back to that moment anytime. It's a very visceral memory for me. And at the time I attached it to doing yoga, because where it happened was I was training to be a yoga teacher. And I had been doing yoga twice a day, every day for like 5 days. And like I said in the book, it was really hot and sweaty. And like I had some physical changes happening there to me that week, just because of all the yoga. We were chanting. I started to see like auras around people. And so I had always equated that moment to the yoga, which it certainly could have been. But once I kind of came to the understanding that, oh, this is probably just what it feels like anytime we come down from our intellect and are truly present in the moment, with or without the yoga. And the yoga was just like a gateway for me to get there. And so that was really cool for me to see, like, how the understanding made me understand yoga in a whole new way. And it made me understand all of the spiritual practices that we have, and even art and creativity in a whole new way. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what occurs to me now is I find myself saying something that I don't totally understand, but what we call well-being or happiness or just feeling okay in life, creativity comes from the same place. Like everything just comes from one place inside me, is the way I see it. So when I'm creating, mostly it's painting. You know, I've paintings all around me. I noticed at some point I noticed, wow, when I'm painting, like I really feel good. And I really feel good even when it looks like something's not working, or even when something is very common. When I was talking to people over the weekend, when people create, one of the number one things that comes up is some kind of comparison or judgment, like, oh, this is not any good, or no one's going to like it. And what happens to me when I paint, when I'm in that flow, is I still hear those thoughts, but either they're like really small, like small as a bumblebee, or I'll say to myself, like I'll get the thought, oh, this is not working. No, if you share this, no one's going to like this, or maybe no one's going to like it. It's always like the maybe. And I think to myself, yeah, thank you for that. It's true. Maybe no one will like it. And
right, that's not why I'm here.
And it goes back to what I was saying earlier with this weekend with some other people. That thought or I used to say that thought can stop you from going on with your process, but really there's a little bit of a point where you're really making a choice, kind of not knowing that you're doing it. It's very innocent. And you stop, even though you really want to keep going. And so there's something in that whole flow of those thoughts can still be there, and they can be nasty, but you can just kind of go along with them, and then they fly away like a bumblebee.
Yeah, I'll never forget. I had the honor of talking to Mavis Karn on the phone a while back, and I was talking about something feeling hard. I can't remember what it was, but it was like feeling hard or feeling difficult. And she's a really sweet lady, and I'll just never forget. She kind of was like, "You're doing that." She kind of yelled at me in the sweet grandmotherly way. And I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "You're doing that." And I was like, "Oh, I am doing that."
Yeah. And you know, the thing that helps in all of that is just, it goes back to giving yourself permission. Like you have to be gentle with yourself if you want to get anything done, I think. You know, and give yourself a break.
Yes.
You know,
I think that's the lesson right there.
Yeah.
Be kind to yourself, because we're built in this really we're built to feel life.
Yeah.
That's how we're made. So yeah, you feel like shit sometimes. Like it's okay.
Yeah.
Like that's how we're made. Yeah.
That could be the main lesson of your book, you know. You feel like shit sometime, and it's okay. Okay, let's go.
Okay. That could be the new subtitle. Yeah.
There are a few other places that I bookmarked, and one was you made the connection, which I really loved, about you know, our bodies and our health and the entire system that often, not often, but all the time is bringing us back to health. Like if we have a cut, we have a cold, like we don't really have to do anything about those things. Like there's a power in us that brings us back. But you made a connection with the body and the mind, and it started I think this one was when you were waking up with some ringing in your ears and maybe some
Yeah,
vertigo.
vertigo.
You mind telling that story?
Sure. Well, the vertigo story is kind of a long story, but I put it succinctly in the book, that it was essentially, well, yeah, I'll try to make it short. It's essentially, I have something called Meniere's disease, and I didn't know it though for like the first 2 or 3 years that I had Meniere's disease. I just would get these sudden crazy vertigo attacks, and I had ringing in my ears, and the ringing in my ears started first, and I used to get really, really frustrated and annoyed with the ringing, which is also called tinnitus. And at the time I was a big meditator, and I couldn't meditate in silence anymore because there's always this ringing. And so I even stopped meditation, and I would get just really frustrated. And turns out, so long story short, the tinnitus was linked to my vertigo. And it turns out that when I have ringing in my ears, it's actually a sign that the inflammation is building up in my body. So what Meniere's disease is fluid retention in your body, and the fluid builds up in your inner ear, and it messes with your vestibular system, causing severe dizziness. And for me, it was like 3 or 4 days of vertigo with vomiting, like where I couldn't get out of bed. And so I discovered that the ringing in my ears was in some ways helping me, because when my ears would start to ring louder than normal, it was kind of a clue for me that there's a little bit more inflammation in my body than normal, and that maybe the fluid was building up in my ears, like that a vertigo attack might come soon. And so I began to listen. Instead of getting frustrated with my tinnitus, I was like, oh, well, what if I listened and drank a ton of water, really watched my diet, got my inflammation down. And it actually started to help me kind of manage this vertigo symptoms that I would get.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah. So I didn't know if you wanted to talk about how we linked.
Yeah. Well, when you
that.
tell that story, what I love with what you did is you made the connection between our bodies and noticing things and having that intelligence to do what you need to do, and our mental health as well.
Yeah.
And so you're right. Our bodies are innately intelligent, which is what you just described, right? This is true when it comes to our mental health as well. We can use our negative feelings as information. Instead of railing against having a negative feeling, as I did with my tinnitus, we can see that negative feelings are alerting us to our current state of mind. They're telling us that we are caught up in a whole mess of thinking.
Yeah. And that's easier said than done sometimes when you're in the middle of a whole mess of thinking. But there is something, for me anyway, I have, gives me great trust and assurance that this is always how it works, because I always come out of it okay.
Yeah.
I always like recenter and come back to myself at some point, no matter how much I was in the mess of thinking. And it looks to me like it has a lot less to do with anything I've done on my part.
Yeah. Yeah. Just the naturalness
Mm-hmm.
of the whole thing. And that's what's been so amazing for me the past couple of years is learning that, basically when I get caught up in like a storm of negativity, which happens pretty much every day, it's no different from like yesterday. We had a morning of rain, and then it cleared out. It was beautiful. And here in Oregon, we're in this amazing state of denial. Whenever we see in the wintertime, we see blue sky and sun, we think, oh, it's over. So I took a long walk to the grocery store. And when I came out of the grocery store, it was like pouring. It's like, oh, you got me again. But I didn't care, because, I actually like the rain, which is something too. And then not everybody likes the rain, but for some reason, I like the rain. You don't mind getting wet, it's going to end. And at some point in the walk, I noticed, oh, it stopped raining at some point. When did that happen? I didn't even notice it stopping. So I think it's very similar to like the way our minds work and the way our You know, if we're engaged in a creative process, it's the same thing happening,
Mm.
you know.
Yeah, say more about that.
Yeah. Well, for example, like for me, the painting, for some reason, it's easy. I just fell into something, right? But when it comes to other things, like I was also working on creating some kind of see, I even hesitate to say, but I'm going to say like a business, something to share with the world around what I've seen in the world and my creativity in the Three Principles community. And it works, it has worked very differently than just starting a painting.
Mm.
It's like you get an idea and then you think, oh, that's not going to work. I don't like that. And some of that is, like you say, like it's valid information. But at other times, it's like, oh, this is not going to work. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to put that aside. But then it comes back again.
Mhm.
And for me, there was a long time of this is one of the things we chatted about when we met last summer, which was, what do I call this? And I was very much like I wanted to call it something that was universal, that everyone could understand. So eventually I got to the point, oh, I'm going to call this, what I'm doing, rediscovering creativity. Because everyone understands a little bit about creativity, what that is. And rediscovering means that you already have it,
Mm.
and you're just finding it again.
I love that.
It took a long time,
Mhm.
and there was a lot of frustration. There was a lot of like defeatism. You know, the kind of things that don't come up when usually come up when I'm painting. But like this is real life. Well, painting is real life too. So when you can see something, and I talked earlier about how important it is to give yourself a break and giving yourself permission not to do it. That is a lot of what allowed me to not get bogged down in negativity, or if I was bogged down, I didn't care because I knew it wasn't going to last. So I don't
Yeah.
know if you can relate to that at all. I think.
Oh, for sure. And I just think that we humans think that everything needs to happen so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm just seeing more and more that it doesn't necessarily happen quickly or linearly. Like for me, I've kind of bounced around with a bunch of different things, and I just created this website business. I actually had a different website business 5 years ago, and I thought I quit it forever. But now it's come back and I'm like reinvigorated with it. So it's like, it's not linear at all.
Right.
And it's in the time that it takes.
Yes.
And when I start to feel bad about it is when I start to judge it, that it's taking too long, or somehow I'm not as clear as other people, but really, I think it's just because we only experience our own inner world. I think if we experience everybody's own inner world, we'd see that everybody's probably a huge mess inside,
Yeah.
no matter in the stages of creation,
Mm-hmm.
before something becomes creative.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, as you were saying that, it struck me that I just had this image. You sometimes hear stories, and you read maybe the biographies of, let's just say, artists. I mean, this applies to all realms of life, but just artists, and you know, books that almost weren't written, and works of art that almost weren't creative.
Right.
And there's something in this that I think there are a lot of people who want to create and who have the ability to create really not just great things for the world, but satisfying things for themselves. And it looks like there's this, you know, wide chasm, or you feel weighed down.
Yeah.
And the fact is, it's just like one little thing can flip that. One little thought, one little, oh, I'm going to give myself a break, or I don't have to follow this thought, or this thought's giving me good information.
Mhm.
And that's really part of what my intention in sharing this is. And it is kind of like a cliche, but it feels very true. Like if in my sharing about creativity, if one person creates something that they would not have otherwise created, like that's amazing to me.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I think more than, as I saw this weekend when we went through this exercise, or this playful time of just creating and talking, some of the people were really touched by it, so much so, I don't know if you ever get this, I was a little taken back. Well, like sometimes like when we try something and we often have the experience of, well, that didn't work, and that feels a certain way. But then sometimes when it looks like it really works, that can feel a little scary too.
Yeah. Well, I think that's beautiful what you're creating. And the word that was coming up for me when you're talking is vulnerability,
Mhm.
and just your openness to share what creativity looks like for you is so helpful for other people to see, because it goes back to that same thing. It's like by you telling people you're really kind to yourself and gentle to yourself, because sometimes you have negative thinking. I think that gives people permission to be
Yeah,
like, oh, look at, he's an artist and a creative, and he sometimes has negative thinking too, and look what he creates.
yeah,
It's like, and I think that was a big reason why I wanted to share my stories in my book, was just to be really open with people, that um, just to be vulnerable and kind of show the messy side, and that like the mess is part of the beauty.
yeah.
Um, I always think an alternative title of this book is The Beautiful Mess.
Love it.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and maybe I'll write another book called The Beautiful Mess and take chapters out of it. I don't know, but I really believe it's this duality of divine perfection, which was where creativity and intuition and all of that lives, mixed or at the perfect juxtaposition of humanness, which in our humanness can feel messy and sloppy. And we are the intersection of both. And I think it just it requires deep compassion to hold all of that
Yeah,
together.
yeah. And one area I want to shift into is because we both have this going on, is we have had our own experiences in creating things and getting insight and learning, but we're both engaged, in you at the moment much more than I am, in terms of having a business and multiple things, sharing and working with other people. So I'm curious to hear, like, what is it for you? What is it like for you to work with other people? I think you do. I think before you were doing like writing workshops as well as
Yeah,
you know
I've tried a lot of different
teaching
things. I can
music.
just get, I'm I don't, one gift I have, I don't always love talking about my gifts, but I'm learning how to talk about them. One
Yeah.
gift I have is that when I have an idea, I don't have a lot of thinking around just trying it and and then maybe never doing it again, and then maybe continuing it. But I don't have a lot. Yeah, that's always been easy for me. I'm like, oh yeah, I'll just try that. So because of that, I've had a lot of different varied things I've tried. And one of them, yeah, I was doing writing workshops. I did a writing marathon online, which I hosted with a wonderful pal, Stephanie, who's in the Three
Yeah.
Principles community. Done Know Your Nature group coaching. I don't know what the question was, but
Well, what do you notice in terms of other people, and what do you feel? How do you help other people in terms of seeing things that you've seen that maybe they're not seeing yet?
yeah, it kind of varies depending on the person, and it kind of varies depending on where I am. And just going back to being vulnerable and messing up, I don't always get it right.
Mhm.
Or it looks to me like I don't always get it right. And then I could find out 3 years later that that person heard something in what I said, or that person was so upset with me that they ended up, doing something that worked out perfectly, you know. But working with people, I just try to be as open as possible and actually come in with zero expectations. And that's the work, is kind of emptying. Like even coming here today to talk to you, a few times this morning, I'm like, oh, what are we going to talk about? What should I say? And I'm like, nope, just empty,
Yeah.
empty, and just come blank slate. Because it's not that it's bad to prepare. There's a lot of things I prepare for, but it can taint the magic of what could happen in the moment.
Yeah.
So I just try to do that at all times, the best that I can when I work with people.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. And it strikes me that sometimes, um, I think especially in science, they talk about a light bulb moment,
Mhm.
right? But I think in this realm that we're exploring, the light bulb can be delayed.
Right.
it could be years later where something happens and then the light goes off. I love that because you never know when the light's going to go off. I think that's
Yeah.
you never know when the light's going off, and that to me is so hopeful.
Hmm. And the light bulb might look more like a match flame, or
Yeah.
like like we often wait for these big things, and sometimes it can be a really small thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you another question about the creative realm. So, and I'll just preface it a little bit. For me, part of the reason that um, I fell into painting and it was so easy for me was I was able to see that you can create something that's really beautiful, that you love, that other people love, but it doesn't have to look like anything. It doesn't have to be realistic. And there was many centuries in the painting world where people did, just realistic looking images. That's all there was. And then at some point, I'm reading a book about it right now. At some point it maybe started in the 1800s, but definitely in the 1900s, it started changing and people did all this. They just broke all the rules.
Mm.
And then like the whole abstract movement was born and became very, I think now as I walk around sometimes you'll see, I guess I'll just call it paintings that don't look like anything, abstract paintings in offices, in government buildings, in homes, and everywhere. And so one of the reasons it was easy for me to know that what I was doing was valuable, maybe, or just it's something that I could feel some competency in because I wasn't trying to create something that looked like something. Now with music, it's kind of an interesting thing too. And you opened up the subject of the ukulele, and you're teaching people. Is that right?
Well, kids.
Kids.
They're like my friends' kids.
Oh, that's even better. That's even better because kids are so open. So I'm not really sure what my question is, but in music, it does often need to sound a certain way. There is a certain feeling of harmony or rhythm or whatever you want to call it that we find pleasing.
Mhm.
So I guess what I say sometimes, if I tried to play piano, and I have a piano, electric piano behind me, like I try to paint,
Yeah.
it might not sound very good. And so I might have this idea, well, I'm not musical. I can't create music the way I create painting.
Yeah.
So I don't know if my question is making any sense to you, but just.
Well, I'm not sure, but it does remind me of something I just read recently as a book called Sacred Sound.
Oh.
And somewhere in the beginning of the book, I don't have it next to me, but it said something along the lines, there's actually not a great evolutionary reason why we're musical, other than maybe it brings people together in community. But there's like, and yet our brains are completely wired for music. Like our brain, it's because of how our brains are wired that those certain chords make sense to us. So it's like biologically, we're actually wired for music. And I just thought that was so cool. And I'm sure it's the same way with painting and visual arts, like colors, certain colors probably make us feel a certain way. I mean, I'm sure there's all sorts of science around all of this. And even your abstract art, you say it's not of anything, but it's color and it evokes a feeling.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And we feel that feeling, even though we can't like conceptualize it with words. And I think it's the same in music too.
Music, yeah. And what is it like to teach kids music?
Well, I'm just kind of getting started into it. I have a little bit of that getting into over my head feeling because I've always just played the ukulele and guitar for myself. And the way I do lots of things is I'm kind of a mess around kind of person until I learn it. I'm not really a study by the book and then learn all the like, so I've noticed that I've had thinking of like, how can I be a teacher when I don't really know how I do what I do? But I'm trying to just trust that that it'll just work out, that I'm just present and teach what I know in the way that I know it, that will resonate with kids, hopefully.
Yeah. And is there anything in like the way you approach the kids that you find is helpful I mean, it seems like you'd be a very gentle, fun teacher.
Well, thanks. I mean, I really just started with my neighbor, and then I have a lesson tomorrow, and it's really just a trial, but I just try to be with them and
Yeah.
I just have fun. I think the ukulele is such a fun instrument,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of lightness and joy about it for some reason, and then it's very accessible for kids. And so um, the other thing about the ukulele is there's a lot of chords that only use one finger, which make
Mm,
it real. So you can actually play a bunch of songs using 3 chords that only use one finger, which is
yeah.
that really sets the bar really low. So they get success pretty quickly.
Yeah. And when you play for yourself, do you find yourself improvising a lot?
I don't. So with music, I just kind of cover uh, other people's songs, but I
Oh,
love making them my own.
yes. Oh, that's
Yeah.
great. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. And I have a band. I formed a band during the pandemic, and that's been super fun.
Tell me about the band.
Well, I used to be really shy to play in front of people. And then I have these 2 neighbors who have been in lots of bands. So they've kind of coached me how to be in a band and how to play with people. And it's a whole different thing than playing by yourself, because there's a lot of communication, there's timing, there's like nonverbal face gestures you have to make to each other. So it's this like whole new language.
Yeah, and what are the other instruments in the band?
So I sing and play guitar, and then a mandolin player and an upright bass player.
Oh, that's great. Does your band have a name?
We've had several. I think it's
Okay,
the neighbors.
the neighbors. I love that. And you can play. Have you seen one of the things that came out during the pandemic was a lot of porch concerts. So I think the
Oh,
neighbors
nice.
could go around to all the porches
Yeah,
all over
that's
your
great.
town.
Yeah,
And
we played our block party this summer outside, which is fun.
that's exciting. Well, next time I talk to you, I think because I've thought many times to get a ukulele. Partly because I thought, oh, that looks like a much easier thing to play than a piano or something that's also it's portable.
Hmm.
There you go. You
I
can.
have a camping ukulele.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have the one that is like nice, and I play at home, and then I have like this kind of like $50 ukulele that I just take camping or on trips.
Great.
Yeah, it doesn't sound as good as the nice one, but it can get watered on it, and yeah.
Okay. Well, I might be getting in touch with you soon and maybe asking you for some recommendations on a good
Great.
starter ukulele. And um, so, yeah.
I'm
So,
excited for you. It's such a fun
yeah.
instrument.
Yeah. See,
And there's a lot of, I mean, we can talk later, but
yeah.
I have some resources for you.
Okay, great. Great. And is there anything else on this topic or any other topic that you'd like to share or say before we come to a close?
No, just that I'm excited that you're doing this, and I think that you're a great facilitator and bringer of people together to talk about creativity. So I'm excited for you to launch this into the world.
Yeah, great. And thank you so much. And I don't know, it's kind of what we talked about. We don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how far it's going to go.
Yeah.
I don't know if YouTube's going to like it or it's going to cancel it or it's going to make it go viral, but we'll keep going. And just I so appreciate your being my first person to talk with.
Yes, thank you. And just you're following the nudge, right? So just keep listening to the nudge.
Totally. Well, okay, Sarah, thanks so
All right,
much.
thanks, Tom.